Imagine sitting on the most famous talk show in America, the lights shining bright, the audience laughing. But behind the scenes, the atmosphere is far from friendly. For 30 years, Johnny Carson brought America's biggest stars into living rooms across the country, making them seem warm, charming, and perfect. But when the cameras turned off, Johnny's smile faded, and in its place, an unbearable truth about Hollywood legends emerged. Today, we dive into the shocking revelations about the 9 Golden Age stars who made Carson uncomfortable, furious, and downright scared. Joan Crawford, the icy queen. Joan Crawford stepped onto the Tonight Show stage. She was everything Hollywood dreamed of, poised, glamorous, and immaculately put together. But behind the camera, she was far from the perfect lady. Her backstage behavior was legendary for its cruelty. One incident in particular shocked the staff. A young production assistant, fresh to the industry, accidentally entered Crawford's dressing room with the water she had requested. What happened next was nothing short of a verbal assault. Crawford ripped into the assistant, calling her a brainless little and suggesting she find work at a brothel. As the assistant fled in tears, the crew froze in disbelief. And while Carson kept his composure on stage, off camera, he couldn't hide his disgust. He once said, "I've interviewed corpses with more personality, but this wasn't just about bad behavior." Carson saw Crawford as someone who hid her true nature behind a carefully rehearsed persona, fooling audiences into thinking she was a warm, gracious star. Years later, when Christina Crawford's memoir exposed the abuse she suffered as a child, Carson wasn't surprised. He'd already seen Crawford's true face. Frank Sinatra, the legend, the man with a voice that could melt hearts. But behind the charm, there was a darker side to Sinatra that Carson couldn't ignore. One night, Sinatra arrived with his entourage, 8 men who didn't exactly scream show business. They looked more like a group you'd want to avoid in a dark alley. And then there was the infamous incident when Sinatra, used to getting his way, grabbed a floor manager by the tie and snarled, "Nobody tells me when I've got 3 minutes. I'll go on when I'm ready." This wasn't just a moment of frustration. This was intimidation, pure and simple. Carson witnessed this power play and nearly canceled the segment, only continuing because of Sinatra's immense drawing power. But what truly disturbed Carson was Sinatra's complete disregard for others, especially women. During a commercial break, Sinatra made a disgusting remark about a female staff member's appearance. Carson snapped, "We don't talk about my staff that way here." That was the final straw for Carson. He never wanted to deal with Sinatra again. Orson Welles, the genius with an overinflated ego. Orson Welles was a genius. There's no denying that. The man behind Citizen Kane was a legend of cinema. But on The Tonight Show, his ego was even bigger than his talent. When Welles appeared, he often refused to follow the script, criticizing prepared questions as pedestrian and obvious. He'd cross them out, handing back an empty page. Imagine trying to interview one of Hollywood's greatest minds with no preparation. Nothing but Welles' whims to guide the conversation. But it wasn't just his demands that made Carson fume. It was his complete lack of respect for the show. Welles ignored cues to wrap up the interview, stretching a scheduled 7-minute segment into a 25-minute monologue. Carson had to bump 2 other guests. He never forgot how Welles treated the show like his personal platform. "Genius doesn't excuse everything," Carson said after that appearance, and he meant it. Bette Davis, the queen of verbal abuse. Bette Davis was Hollywood royalty, and that didn't just come with adoration. It came with a reputation for being difficult. Off camera, Davis was notoriously abrasive, often interrupting other guests, especially younger performers. And when she wasn't disrupting others, she was berating them. The crew remembers how she turned her back on co-stars, her jealousy boiling over when someone else received attention. But the real shock came from her verbal abuse. Staff members recalled her using offensive language in private, including sexist and racist remarks. Once, a makeup artist tried to help her, but Davis refused, claiming she needed someone whose hands don't shake like they're coming off a 3-day drunk. Even Carson, who was known for being unflappable, couldn't stay silent. When Davis belittled a production assistant, Carson stepped in. "Miss Davis, on this show, we speak to everyone with respect, or we don't speak at all." She backed down, but Carson's tolerance for Davis had worn thin. Mickey Rooney, the little big abuser. Mickey Rooney was a giant of Hollywood, known for his charm and charisma. But behind the scenes, he wasn't the charming gentleman everyone thought he was. Rooney's behavior toward young women was often inappropriate, from unwanted touching to suggestive comments. Production assistants dreaded working with him, as he would often hold their wrists too long or make them uncomfortable with his advances. And then there was his drinking. Rooney appeared visibly intoxicated during several of his Tonight Show appearances, slurring his words and losing his train of thought. One infamous segment had him telling a story about Judy Garland that quickly turned inappropriate, forcing Carson to cut him off. "Is he drunk, or is this just who he is now?" Carson reportedly asked after the taping. It was clear. Rooney's behavior had gone beyond just a bad habit. It was a problem Carson couldn't overlook. Sasa Gabor, the diva of excess. Sasa Gabor was the epitome of glamour. Her appearances on The Tonight Show were a spectacle. But behind the scenes, she was a diva in every sense of the word. Her demands were legendary. She required a specific temperature in her dressing room, a fresh batch of orchids, no carnations, and even her own lighting technician. And if any of her demands weren't met, she would refuse to leave her dressing room, throwing off the entire production schedule. Her behavior wasn't just exhausting, it was disruptive. Guests had to wait, staff worked overtime, and the show's timing was thrown off track because of her. After one particularly demanding appearance, Carson quipped, "Next time she wants to be on, tell her we've renamed the show The Tonight Show, starring Sasa Gabor, and I'll be happy to be her sidekick." It was a joke, but it was clear. Carson was done dealing with her. Shelley Winters, the unpredictable powder keg. Shelley Winters was a two-time Oscar winner with decades of experience. On paper, she should have been a fantastic guest, but Winters was unpredictable, prone to explosive outbursts that could turn a light-hearted interview into a full-blown political debate. During one appearance, Winters launched into a 5-minute tirade about government corruption, derailing the show's usual format. Her volatility wasn't just verbal. She was also physically aggressive. On a British talk show, she once threw a glass of whiskey in another guest's face after a sexist comment. Winters didn't conform to the traditional talk show format. She had no filter, and Carson, though usually a master of steering conversations, found himself struggling to control her. But Carson respected her authenticity. "I may not want to vacation with her, but at least she means every word she says," he said after one particularly intense appearance. Jane Russell, the star whose politics. Carson couldn't tolerate Jane Russell, the iconic bombshell of the 1940s and 50s, was a frequent guest on The Tonight Show. Her beauty and charm made her a beloved star, but behind the scenes, her extreme political views began to clash with Carson's values. Russell's hardline conservative stances became more vocal, particularly toward LGBTQ+ individuals in the industry. She reportedly made derogatory comments about gay staff members, which deeply disturbed Carson, who had many friends in the LGBTQ+ community. During one appearance, she allegedly refused to allow a gay makeup artist to touch her face, demanding a replacement. What truly crossed the line, though, was when Russell insisted on not sharing a show with Rock Hudson, making snide remarks about his sexuality, something that was known but not publicly acknowledged at the time. Carson, though personally a moderate Republican, had no tolerance for such behavior on his show, especially when it involved personal attacks on people in his circle. After this incident, Carson made sure Russell never appeared on his show again. His decision to ban her wasn't just a personal stance, it was about respecting those around him, regardless of their political views. Jerry Lewis, the comedian Carson called truly hateful. Jerry Lewis, one of the most successful comedians in history, had a public persona that was both beloved and larger than life. But behind that manic energy and physical comedy was a man who, according to Carson and many others, was not only difficult but genuinely hateful. Lewis's egotism was so extreme that it often overshadowed his talent. During one appearance, Lewis hijacked the show, talked over Carson, and even adjusted his tie without permission. For Carson, this was a power play he couldn't tolerate. But it wasn't just his behavior toward Carson that disturbed everyone. It was how he treated the crew. Lewis was notorious for treating staff members with disdain, never bothering to learn their names and addressing them as camera guy or makeup girl. One of the most shocking incidents occurred when Lewis blew up at a camera operator for coughing during rehearsal. He reportedly demanded the cameraman be removed from the studio just because he breathed like an amateur. To Carson, Lewis' behavior was a stark contrast to his public image as a tireless advocate for children. The hypocrisy made him sick. After Lewis's last appearance, Carson reportedly said, "In a town full of phonies, he stands out as truly hateful, and that takes some doing." Johnny Carson spent 3 decades interviewing the biggest names in entertainment, but his most revealing moments didn't happen on camera. They happened in private, away from the spotlight. His list of guests he truly disliked offers an unvarnished look at the darker side of Hollywood, where power, ego, and cruelty often went unchecked. Carson's blacklist wasn't just a collection of difficult personalities. These were people who crossed the line into abusive, manipulative, or just downright toxic behavior. What makes Carson's judgments so valuable is that they weren't based on gossip or tabloid rumors. They came from years of first-hand experience. He knew what it took to be a true professional in the spotlight, and when a guest fell short of those standards, Carson was quick to notice. Whether it was Joan Crawford's coldness, Sinatra's bullying, or Jerry Lewis's outright cruelty, Carson wasn't fooled by the polished images that Hollywood tried to sell. He saw the truth beneath the glitter and glamour, and he wasn't afraid to share it, even if it meant angering some of the biggest stars in the industry. So, what can we take from Carson's experience? Maybe it's a reminder that fame doesn't guarantee decency. Behind the bright lights of Hollywood, there are personalities that don't shine nearly as bright. And sometimes the stars we admire most for their talent are the ones we should be wary of the most. Thank you for watching and taking this journey into Hollywood's hidden side. Johnny Carson's perspective on his most controversial guests offers us a rare, candid look at the truth behind the fame and the people who helped shape the industry's golden age. His assessments remind us that while talent is celebrated, character is just as important. And sometimes the most shocking truths lie just beneath the surface. If you want to keep exploring more stories like this, just click the screen now.